In June 1967, it took only 6 days for the armies of Egypt, Syria, and Jordan to collapse under Israeli offensives. For the Palestinian people living in the region, the total defeat of these established Arab states left a massive political vacuum. They realized that if they wanted a homeland, they could no longer rely on neighboring countries to fight for them. Enter Yasser Arafat. He recognized that the existing Palestinian resistance consisted of scattered, marginalized factions. His primary objective was to pull these fractured groups together under a single umbrella, the Palestine Liberation Organization, or PLO, and forge them into a recognized political entity. But an armed political movement needs a place to organize, train, and launch operations. Without a sovereign territory of their own, the PLO had to operate from inside the borders of other nations. This created an immediate structural conflict. To build their own power, the PLO effectively had to set up a state within a state. Wherever they settled, their armed independence directly challenged the authority of the government hosting them. By the late 1960s, the PLO had established its primary base in Jordan. Over time, the host government's authority eroded. Radical militant factions operating under the PLO umbrella, like the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, a Marxist-Leninist revolutionary group, began launching highly visible autonomous attacks right from Jordanian soil. In September 1970, militants from the PFLP hijacked 3 commercial airliners and forced them to land at Dawson's Field, a remote desert airstrip in Jordan, holding dozens of international passengers hostage. For Jordan's King Hussein, this was a clear signal that his government was no longer in charge of its own territory. He declared military rule and ordered the Jordanian armed forces to move against the Palestinian camps. The resulting clashes dragged Jordan into a brutal civil war. The attempt to host an independent armed resistance movement inside an existing country made a violent confrontation mathematically certain. Over the next 10 months, in a conflict the Palestinians named Black September, the Jordanian military systematically dismantled the PLO's infrastructure. Thousands of Palestinians were killed or expelled from the country entirely. The defeat enraged the surviving militants. To channel that anger, Arafat and his political party, Fatah, organized a highly secretive cell called the Black September Organization. Its stated purpose was to take revenge on both the Jordanian monarchy and Israel. This new group functioned as a proxy. It allowed the official PLO leadership to maintain plausible deniability on the global stage, while its radicalized members carried out a string of international assassinations, bombings, and hijackings. The most infamous of these operations took place here, during the 1972 Summer Olympics in Munich, Germany. Members of the Black September organization infiltrated the Olympic Village, took 9 Israeli athletes hostage, and ultimately murdered 11 Israelis and a German police officer. The Black September organization gave defeated militants an outlet for their rage, but the strategy was politically expensive. The escalation into international terror severely damaged the PLO's efforts to be seen as a legitimate diplomatic representative of the Palestinian people. Following their expulsion from Jordan, the PLO relocated their headquarters to Lebanon. They quickly rebuilt their military infrastructure in the south, bringing in heavy weapons and eventually becoming deeply entangled in the Lebanese civil war that erupted in 1975. The PLO used their new Lebanese bases to launch frequent raids and artillery strikes into northern Israel. In 1982, the Israeli military responded. They launched Operation Peace for Galilee, sending thousands of troops and armored vehicles across the border to dismantle the Palestinian bases. After a prolonged siege in Beirut, the PLO was forced into exile once again. This time, they relocated their headquarters to Tunis, Tunisia. Looking at this map, you can see the strategic problem. Tunis is roughly 1,500 miles from Jerusalem. Being physically isolated by the Mediterranean Sea meant the PLO could no longer organize cross-border guerrilla raids or maintain a direct military threat. Without a shared border, the era of armed struggle was effectively over. Arafat had to pivot. He abandoned the military approach and embraced the only tool he had left to secure a Palestinian state: international diplomacy. Arafat spent the late 1980s launching a concentrated diplomatic offensive. His efforts eventually led to secret negotiations with the Israeli government, culminating in the 1993 Oslo I Accord. The agreement required a massive concession from both sides. Arafat officially renounced violence and recognized Israel's right to exist in peace. In return, Israel recognized the PLO as the legitimate representative of the Palestinian people, sealing the deal with a public handshake at the White House. By trading armed resistance for diplomatic recognition, Arafat transformed a stateless, fractured resistance movement into an internationally recognized political authority. However, the agreements triggered an immediate internal backlash. Many hardliners and rejectionist factions within the Palestinian movement viewed Arafat's diplomatic concessions as a complete surrender of their historical claims to the land. This intense ideological divide created an opening for rival organizations. Groups like Hamas, a militant political faction with roots in the Muslim Brotherhood, flatly rejected the Oslo Accords and refused to lay down their arms. That fracture defined the next 3 decades of Palestinian politics. The national movement split into 2 distinct paths: a recognized diplomatic authority governing parts of the West Bank, and a heavily armed militant faction controlling the Gaza Strip. Yasser Arafat successfully navigated a stateless organization through decades of exile, eventually securing a place for Palestine on the global political map. But the price of that international legitimacy was the permanent fracturing of the very movement he had built.